Everyone, you're watching Let's Talk About Prepping. I'm Tyler, your host, and in this video, I want to talk about our prepper mindset. A lot of us get into prepping as a reaction to something. You could argue that it's sort of a fear-based response. Most of us have encountered some potential threat that we've learned about, which has caused us to begin preparing. But regardless of that, once you're in the community, you begin to realize that there are many potential threats. And it quickly becomes a game of trying to identify the threats that you should prepare for if you're trying to be that conscious about it at all. Because many people are just trying to prepare for their one pet apocalypse, if you will. Whatever your reason for being here, I think that there's a good way to analyze not only the threats that you perceive, but just every interaction that you have and the way that you strategize both for your life and in any cooperative or competitive endeavor. What I'm talking about here is game theory. Game theory is a branch of mathematics that was founded by John Nash, the man played by Russell Crowe in the movie A Beautiful Mind. He was a brilliant mathematician, and one of the things that he did was use math and numbers to analyze interactions between different players, different people in a cooperative or a competitive game, which is essentially just any interaction between different players. Game theory breaks the inputs and outputs and expected results that a person might expect to see from any cooperative or competitive endeavor and breaks them down and uses algebra to basically output the equilibrium, that is the outcome which one can expect the most often given the various preferences of the players involved. So essentially, by looking at what each player wants out of the game and their strategies that are available to them to choose from, game theory analyzes what each player can be expected to choose to do through the course of that game and compare that expectation against the strategies available to the player performing this analysis. And through this, the player performing the analysis is able to decide what they can expect other players to do through the course of the game. So there are a lot of different iterations of this, a lot of different game examples with names like the prisoner's dilemma, the stag hunt, chicken, date night, and various different situations which are used as analogs to various different situations in real life. And these have applications in war, business, personal life, personal decisions, everything. Every human interaction can be analyzed using game theory, including the things that you want to prepare for and the things that you may need to react to in some of the situations that we talk about. So today, just to give a good example of how game theory analyzes a situation, we're going to look at the prisoner's dilemma. Now, if you're familiar with game theory, I apologize because this will probably be the umpteenth time that you've heard this. And if you do get into game theory, it's inevitable that you will hear this infinite times, but please bear with me. So the prisoner's dilemma is based on the premise that two criminals with no considerable amount of loyalty to each other have been captured by the police. They've been captured in a situation which indicates that they were committing a much more serious crime than the police have evidence for. Let's say they were breaking and entering with the potential intent to burglarize the location, but with no clear evidence to the fact. So far, they've only got breaking and entering. What they do, the police, is separate the two suspects and give them a plea bargain. If they're both silent, they will both spend 2 years in jail for the crime that they have evidence for. If one of them confesses and the other remains silent, the one who confesses will go free, while the one who remains silent will get 10 years for the added charges. The same is true in the other direction. If the other person, let's say Jane, the female of the group, confesses, John, the male, will remain in jail for 10 years while Jane goes free. Now, when we have two-player games, it's nice to denote them using males and females just because the acronyms stay nice and clean. Anyways, If they both confess, they will both spend 5 years in jail. I've got a little chart here, so let's take a look at it. All right, so obviously, if they both stay silent, if they had some predetermined plan to both have that loyalty to each other, they both spend only 2 years in prison. Combined, that's 4 years, which is less than the 10 years combined that results from each of the other results. Now, if they were part of a gang or they had some sort of mutually assured punishment to make sure that they both stayed loyal to each other, then they could potentially reach this outcome. But in this situation, it is assumed that they are equal players with an equal propensity towards loyalty or individualism. Now, we know that most people with no loyalty will be self-determinant. So it is assumed in this situation and just generally, which is backed up by practical evidence, as this is applied in real life constantly, that people will confess if they do not have an actual and tangible reason to remain loyal to each other. So this is considered to be an unstable solution. Now, in game theory, Nash Equilibrium is the concept that says that a solution is stable no matter what the other player chooses in their strategy making decisions. So if John confesses, he will receive either 0 or 5 years in prison, dependent on whether or not Jane remains silent or confesses. And the same is true for Jane. If she confesses and John is silent, she will walk free. Or if they both confess, she will receive a maximum of 5 years. Now, if you look at each of these, you will see that the totals of 2 and 10 equaling 12 and 0 and 5 equaling 5 for each of these denominations, while not applicable in every iteration of a game theory matrix, does also show you which of these up, down, left, right columns is going to be dominant over the other in your decision-making processes. And this is something that is delved into much more deeply in later parts of game theory concepts. But basically what this little basic example shows us is that with the information we have available to us, that they can either remain silent or confess, or remain silent or confess. For instance, if there were consequences to confessing, we would have confess plus consequence and confess minus consequence, which would make our grid considerably larger. But in this case, we only have these choices available to us. And with no further data, we can know that each person will recognize that regardless of the actions of the other, they will always be benefited by confessing, and could even be understood to want to confess by the other, given that their options always maximize the benefit by confessing. So for many of you, this will look pretty self-explanatory. In fact, a lot of game theory is very intuitive, and it's really just a mathematical way to help you back up what your own brain is telling you. But whenever you have a lot more different factors, for instance, each group has many different strategies, many different iterations that they could choose from, it begins to be very helpful to be able to write down all of those different options and assign them values based on the inputs that you have available to you, like potential for lives lost or potential for resources gained or resources lost. It helps you to not lose track of the potential different factors that need to come into play when making your strategies. So it can be an extremely helpful field to study, and I'll provide links down below, including really easy entry-level links by Hank Green and SciShow, who I really like, and some more advanced things. I highly suggest the TED Talk, which really applies the concept of game theory to the difference between infinite games and finite games. That is the difference between a game like chess, which, while having nearly infinite moves, is an extremely finite game, meaning that it has an end, versus business or war, which is never-ending and has changing players. It makes some really good analogies to America and its need for values to remain relevant in the world's infinite game. As you can see, game theory has many different applications, and I think it's something that a lot of preppers could really benefit from. because I'm constantly reminded by the fact that a lot of preppers are driven by internal stimulus and not necessarily mathematical logic, if you will. Anyways, I hope this is interesting. I hope it spurs some conversation and we can get some people talking about strategy making choices in emergency situations and decision making strategies based on mathematical heuristics, if you will. All right, well, anyways, I hope you guys are all doing well. Everybody stay safe out there.